Welcome back to Align, Engage, Fulfilled. I'm your host, Clarence Maur, and I first want to say thank you for tuning in today. If you've been with us from the very beginning, thank you for your continued support. But if you're listening to or watching us for the first time today, I want to say welcome to the show. In our last episode, Natalie Jackson showed us the architecture of the employee journey, the blueprints for a seamless experience. But before that, we talked to John Formica about the vision of a magical culture. But today, I want to pivot to the third piece of this trilogy on employee experience. Because for much of our conversation on engagement so far this season, we've talked about the systems that are in place for employees. But today, we're going to look at the systems that are in place specifically for employers. Because the truth is that the systems that a business owner uses to manage their business, whether it's payroll, compliance, benefits, form the foundation of the entire house. And if those systems are broken, if they're expensive or if they're chaotic, that stress trickles down. So you can't build this Disney culture that John Formica started talking to us about for your team if your backend infrastructure is burning down around you. My guest today is a disruptor who is fixing that backend. Kasey Devine spent over a decade inside the giants of the industry, ADP and Trinet. He saw a system that was, in his words, broken on purpose. He saw small businesses forced into opaque, biased buying processes that left them with expensive, clunky systems. So he left to build the fix. Kasey's the founder of Intravia and the infrastructure layer of PEO shopping. He's building a platform that uses AI automation to give founders clarity, speed, and control. And he believes that purpose should drive profit and that you can't have an engaged workforce if your backend systems are built on friction. Today, we're going to ask, can technology actually save culture? And what happens when we finally fix the broken systems that control the relationship between employer and employee? Hi, Kasey. Welcome to the show. I'm so glad to have you.
Thank you so much for the great intro and for the opportunity to speak with you today.
Of course. So I want to start with the first line in your LinkedIn bio. You wrote that PEO shopping is broken and it's broken on purpose. Now, that's a pretty heavy accusation. It implies intent and implies that the confusion in the HR market isn't just a bug, it's a feature that's designed to profit off of business owners. Take us behind the curtain. What did you see in your experience that made you realize the system was rigged against the buyer?
Well, I appreciate the question. And yes, we are saying some inflammatory things, but it is nothing that hasn't been said at an industry happy hour,
Hmm.
in fairness. I'm just saying it out loud.
Yeah.
So when we look at the SMB, especially infrastructure, we're seeing a lot of trends that just haven't really changed in a while. I mean, if you would have recorded this podcast 5 or 10 years ago, I think there might be different reasons for the problems, but
Yeah.
the problems are the same. It's like number one, employee benefits keep going up at an untenable rate. And
Mm.
that is a problem across the infrastructure. Number two, most businesses in the small and to medium sized business space, and when I say that, I also mean nonprofits, can't keep up with compliance burden. And this isn't a political statement, but regardless of which side of the aisle you're on, every time there's a change back and forth, they expect that somebody's just sitting there with a notebook, and that's not necessarily the case. And
Mm.
then the third thing is that people are the thing that drives the success of an organization with
Yes.
it being, hey, I have a good idea or a product or service somebody will give me money for. I've got cash flow or liquidity. We keep seeing time and time again of those two things not really being the defining part of an organization. A lot of the 30 under 30 end up going to jail, not to 40 under 40. So I think that it's the people side that continue to matter. So
Mm.
then to actually answer your question, it's like, well, I've been in the industry 10 years and and the things I was talking to clients about 10 years ago are the same problems. And that
Mm,
doesn't mean that folks aren't spending billions of dollars from a provider standpoint trying to solve the problem. I think that's like the core of when I started seeing that there was a problem, kind of like The Big Short, when someone's like, there's a bubble. It's like there's a
mm,
problem. Like
right.
this is solvable, and that's really where I'm like, I wonder if the answer isn't another vendor, if it isn't more flashbang technology, but maybe better aligning the two and doing some mediation
Mm.
between the businesses and the vendors.
Well, let's pause there for a moment and do a little bit of education because you live in the world of PEO, and for those listening who might not know what that is, it's professional employee organization. Employees just know that they get a paycheck, but
Right.
for the employer, the PEO is that engine room. And again, not all employers are familiar with this,
You're right.
but PEO handles the big three: payroll, benefits, and compliance. Can you
Yes.
explain in simple terms, like what is a PEO, and
Yeah.
why does choosing the wrong one impact the employee experience? How does that trickle down?
Yeah. So uh, anytime you have employees, you have to tackle like payroll taxes, compliance, and some sort of insurances. A lot of the times, once you get to a certain size, that's employee benefits, but there are things like workers' compensation insurance that usually start day one, right? And so if you're a small business owner, and that goes all the way up to a Fortune 100, it doesn't really matter. You have two choices. You can either play whack-a-mole, or you can go to like Costco versus Sam's Club kind of thing. The whack-a-mole approach is like, all right, as I realize I have these problems, or as I see ads on LinkedIn, or I get cold called, I'm going to whack them all. So I see that I need payroll systems, and I'm going to go to my accounting firm or to a payroll provider and hit that mole. And then I realize I need to probably start offering employee benefits, and I find a broker or a workers' comp. I didn't realize that I hired someone in the state of Texas, and now I need to do that. I hit that, right? And like all of these things are what we call like a multi-vendor approach. So you might have those things being administered today without actually being on a PEO. What a PEO is the Sam's Club Costco example, which is basically
Mm,
like I'm going to pool all of that together with other employers under one vendor. And what that allows is economy of scale. So now, if I have a small business, maybe it's a startup with 3 employees, maybe it's a manufacturing conglomerate that has 500. It doesn't really matter. I'm always going to have the ability to go to market,
mm,
and it's just the economics of it. Or even if you had 500 employees, or if you had three, who's going to win in a negotiation? You or a group that has 10, 20, 500, 700,000 employees, like negotiating for these things. That's
mm.
what a PEO is. So you're basically offloading the compliance burden, and you're pooling together resources to be able to buy down the cost to you for those insurances, and to spread out the risk among a pool. That's what they do, and that is a model pretty unique to the United States because of our infrastructure. Like Canada, for example, that's not really as much of a thing because healthcare is socialized. And
Mm.
so there are about 200,000 small businesses in the United States that use a PEO today. That's is a $414 billion industry. You may have heard of it, you may have not have, and it's been growing 15% year over year, quadrupling in size since 2012. So you've either heard of it, or it's the biggest industry in the United States you've never heard of.
So I want to make sure that our either employee listeners or people who are new to PEO really understand this. How does a bad PEO choice lead to something like worse health insurance or
Yeah.
clunky pay portals for the team? How does that
Yeah.
relationship happen?
The same way that picking the wrong partner or spouse leads to misery. So you think about, like, you're solving for any of these things, and you're putting all of your eggs into one basket to get them solved. And so you think, like, now you think about, all right, how do most folks buy things? Well, a lot of the time, it's gonna be based on price versus perceived value, and that works a lot of the time because you can reasonably understand what's going on. If, like, if somebody said, I'm going to sell you a car for $50,000. We know enough to be like, is that a Ferrari? Is that like a car that's been in 5 accidents? What's going on here? You know what I mean? Like, we know enough to understand the context of, is that a good deal?
Mm,
Now, when you continue, and this is why I think it's broken on purpose, when you continue to pull those threads and you think about, like, all right, most small business owners or even HR leaders or CFOs might know part of the pie when it comes to this, of maybe I know something about employee benefits, maybe I know a lot about payroll or HR or whatever it is. They typically don't know the entire thing. And even if they know the entire thing, they don't know how the PEOs actually do it. So now they're looking at this and they don't understand. They might have talked to 1 to 3 to maybe 5 at the max vendors, not knowing there are 500 plus in the United States,
mm,
and not knowing that all of them do business differently. So you might be walking in thinking that you have the picture and you've gone to the equivalent of cars.com, and you know that you want that red Camry, and not realize that there are several other competitors that you couldn't have just found, Googling it or going to ChatGPT.
mm. So in essence, and correct me if this is wrong, but it really gives you as a business owner, as a business leader, more leverage, more access to resources than you probably didn't have before. Is that
Exactly. Yeah, and that's why it's so dangerous to pick the wrong one.
mm,
Because if I'm going at it and I think I have a good deal, you don't actually know
you don't know.
because
Yeah.
you evaluated less than 1% of the market. That's the first problem. The second problem is they don't understand the differences between them. So maybe I got 3 quotes or 5 quotes, and I'm looking at it and I'm like, well, all of this kind of seems to be pretty similar, and this one is going to maybe save me money this year by going with them because my employee benefits are going to be cheaper and the workers' compensation insurance is going to be cheaper, not knowing that, like, that doesn't necessarily mean that's going to be cheaper again next year,
Right.
or that the service model I'm expecting is going to align with what my employees need, or maybe they overpromise the world saying you can completely outsource your payroll and HR and you touch nothing, not to realize that that wasn't necessarily the case.
Mm,
That's why it's so dangerous, is because, like, those those business processes are core competencies. Those are not, what color stamps are we getting. That is the difference between your runway running out or not. That's the difference between being able to attract and retain the kind of employees that you need to stay afloat.
mm,
And also, too, these have downstream impacts. Like, when I go into that model, you can imagine if you picked the wrong vendor that looked really cheap and they come back 50% higher the next year. Well, when you go shop again, everybody's going to be a little bit weary of, like, what did you do that you were mispriced that bad? And so that has, like, downstream impacts of, like, year over year compounding. So it's really potentially dangerous. Then we could even get into why it's even just hard to get there in the first place too.
mm. So many great insights there. And honestly, if you're listening to this right now and you're an employee and this is sounding like a lot of things that you might not have to worry about, that's why I want to have this episode because I think it's important for us as employees to realize the back end systems that influence and impact how we experience our work as an employee on a day-to-day basis. I come from a mindset of the more I know, the better I can, approach things, the better mindset I can have on things. And if we're going to solve the problems that are broken on purpose, because there are a lot in the world of work, then we have to understand every cog in the wheel, every aspect of this entire work experience. So I think it's great to have Kasey today to kind of help us connect that. If you were with us from the very beginning of the season, you know that what we're trying to explore is this theme of engagement. How do we stay engaged in our work? And this applies to both the employer and the employee experience, because at the end of the day, as Kasey said a few moments ago, it's about the people, right? And whether you're the employer or the employee, there are people, there is a person at the center of it all. So I want to bring us to a little bit more of the conversation around engagement.
Let's do it.
And a quote, Kasey, that you said to me during our introductory call has stuck with me ever since that call. And I've actually brought it up in a couple of episodes before yours, and it has really
Uh-oh.
become the anchor for some episodes. You said, I can be aligned with and believe in a company's mission and vision without being engaged enough to contribute to it.
Yes.
And I thought that that is so profound. And trust, like I work in the space of working with people on alignment and engagement. And what you said is seems so simple. It's like it makes sense. It seems like it's so obvious, but it's also so profound because it separates belief, which is operating more from your head and your heart, and from action, which is more of that hands-on going and doing it. Can you unpack that for us and kind of your mindset behind that? Because when you're talking about infrastructure and the work that you do being around infrastructure,
Mhm.
is that infrastructure the friction that stops an aligned employee from actually contributing? How does bad tech, for example, kill goodwill?
Great question. Even as we get there, even tying into this, why you should care about this. Maybe you try to leave a job because you're going to get higher pay. If you don't understand how this stuff works in infrastructure, you might realize you're actually taking a pay cut
Mm,
because the benefits are more expensive, or
mm,
they look like they're cheaper, and actually you have to pay twice as much to even get into it. So like that's part of why the infrastructure matters downstream. Like you can't just like put your head in the sand. Now,
right.
to get there, like I'm going to prove the point being correct. Uh, Anybody here has somebody they care about. Like, and for me, I'm like a relatively new dad of two, and I have a wife. I can
Congrats.
love them, and I do, and also be addicted to my phone. You know what I mean? And like not be engaged with what's going on in front of me. I can say that they're the most important thing to me and not actually show that. So then
Mm,
when you think about work, usually like I mean, there are times when somebody's going to agree to work, and we need to talk about this of just because it's going to be a means to the end. Like, hey, it's close to where I live, it pays enough for me to pay my bills, and I'm going to go ahead and do this because I need to make a living. And that's perfectly fine. That's dignified. A lot of folks then, though, at some point, whether it's proactively or reactively, will try to understand at some level how their work actually matters and why this is something that's good. Most folks won't engage in work that harms other people. Most people won't engage in work that feels completely pointless.
mm,
So, why does it matter? Well, you can understand if I am signed up to clean a school, you know what I mean? Like that is contributing to health and welfare. That's contributing toward the education and betterment of our society. Like you can pull that pretty quickly. A lot of folks, though, that I'm imagining are listening to this as well, are also more on like the professional services side in that realm, right? Folks who are operating behind a computer at least are some chunk of this.
right.
And so, you know, if you could push keyboard buttons for anybody, it matters of how you're going to be treated, right? And what they're doing. You're not like contributing to like killing puppies, for example, and just to be, you know what I mean? Like you have to. There's something positive there,
Yeah.
otherwise you probably wouldn't do it.
Right.
The infrastructure is the enablement, right? Because whoever started that, the founder had a vision and it was compelling enough to get other people to invest their time and money into it. And you were part of that at some point, and maybe it was very transactional for you. But even if it got there because of the systems. A really great book to recommend here is The E-Myth, the Entrepreneur Myth. Even if you are an employee, it's really good to read that because you can understand how you got from here to there. Of like this organization was started because of some idea, and then all of a sudden they became a professional business owner or a
Mm,
professional employer. And the infrastructure or technology or lack thereof is what failed or what is failing between that point and here. And so that is what I'd argue is like maybe you report to a manager or to the founder of a company or whatever it is that feels dismissive, not engaging, whatever it is. It's probably not because they want to. You know what I mean? And so you can believe in why that company exists or why that organization exists and also not be engaged in it.
right. Yeah. I mean, you said some powerful things, but I think this is a good opportunity to connect it to something that I had a guest, Vicky Shepard, in episode 2. She is like her background is in compensation and total rewards. She emphasized that total rewards isn't just a salary; it's your benefits, it's your equity, it's perks. That's the strategy, but you own the infrastructure. If a company has an amazing benefits package, for example,
Yep.
but the employee has to log into a 1990s style portal to find it, and they don't feel the value. They feel
Hmm.
more of the friction. How much ROI are companies losing just because their PEO interface is opaque? If that
Yeah.
employee can't easily see the value that you're giving them as an employer, does that value effectively not exist?
Yes, like I say this tongue in cheek. If a tree falls in the forest and no one's around to hear it, it does make a sound. Nobody cares.
Mm.
So,
Mm.
like, that's the point. I'll give a really good example. I had, and I'll keep names out of this. I had an employer once. I joined them, and obviously, I've been in this space. So I've worked for the folks that serve businesses doing this. You'd imagine that a lot of the times they're good at it themselves.
Mm.
Joined this new company, which means that mid-year you're switching insurance. And my wife is at CVS pharmacy going to pick up a prescription and goes to hand the insurance card, realizing that it's from my prior employer. And now is calling me while I'm at work, and there's 5 cars behind her trying to access our new insurance the
Mhm.
same week. And because of the infrastructure that was available, I was able to text her a picture of it, or like allow her to log into next time, allow her to log into an app that had that so she wouldn't have to like remember that in a wallet or which one it is. That mattered because in that scenario, it was either she left, you know what I mean, and came back another time, or paid out of pocket for it, and,
Yeah,
and out of
or just
confusion.
continue to frustrate the people behind her as she figured
Yeah.
it out.
Which and that like that bleeds down. Like, don't think that
Yeah,
that doesn't. Maybe that was like your dependent or your spouse, and maybe it wasn't you. Maybe it was you. That's a reflection on the employer, though. Like, even
yeah,
if the benefits were
yeah.
great, it doesn't matter. And the second case in point is in why this infrastructurally makes sense and why you need to understand this at any level is I think total rewards does make sense. And I think folks do a horrible job explaining what's going on right now. A lot of the times, even with like something infrastructurally as open enrollment, which a lot of the country went through in the first quarter of the year or like renewed at, right? If you don't understand, if all you see is that your health insurance went up, and you don't understand that it went up a lot more and your employer ate it, uh, it doesn't matter. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
Like, all the
Yeah.
employees see is that my health coverage is $300 more than it was last year and
Right.
worse. They
Right.
don't understand how much money they paid to make that the best possible case.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So you built Intravia to fix this for the employer,
I
and
did.
you call it the infrastructure layer.
Mhm.
And you use AI to standardize data so that founders can compare PEOs transparently, apples to apples.
Yes.
How does Intravia actually work? And more importantly, when a founder finally has clarity and control over all of this chaos, how
Mhm.
does that free them up to then be a better leader?
Our thesis is that you need to nip all of this in the bud. Like, this needs to be as early downstream as possible, because if this matters, it matters from inception.
Mm.
So we are looking at it from the very early stages. Let's say you're even evaluating how to better serve employees this way more cost effectively right now, or you're doing it for the first time. We're saying like the complexity on the front part is like the first sniff that this is broken on purpose.
Mm.
So if I'm going to evaluate these things on a multi-vendor approach or this pooled PEO approach, do you realize how many documents and how much data needs to happen and be provided to do that? And it's broken on purpose because it's like all of the vendors, like there's not like a standardized like college application, for example.
Right.
Like there's that doesn't exist. Everybody has their own thing, requires information in slightly different formats, and it's all information that like you spend time with, unless you're an HR manager, maybe a couple times a year, maybe. And so you might not even know where that is. You might not even remember what vendors you're using. So now I have to find all of this information. And on top of that, we're a $414 billion industry. Most of them collect this information over email with 8-page Excel documents or PDFs,
Oh,
which is a HIPAA violation, first
right.
of all. And on top of that is like wildly inefficient, because even if I had my act together, I have to like fill out all of this stuff several times. And then we have the vendor bias, because it's like, okay, so I did it. I'm trying to make this better, or I'm at least going to figure out what my options are. Now you're not you're choosing who to shop with based on their SEO on Google, who
Mhm.
cold called you, or who you ran into at a networking event. And like, if this is that important, I don't think that's a really great way to figure out who to shop with.
Right.
So what we're up to is fixing it from the bud, and we're going to continue moving downstream on that. But we think that if it's easier to initiate the shopping process, it's easier to understand the options, and not just that for the small business owner, but that we're giving this technology to the vendors themselves
Mm,
and also to the brokers you might be engaging with. Then what we're trying to do is to fix the entire problem, not just profit by having a really cool mousetrap. Like, we're trying
mm,
to level up the industry, whether it's through us or white labeled through another provider. We would like you to interact with Intravia and not even know you interacted with Intravia. We just need to make it better than PDFs and Excel documents.
yeah. Well, I will say, as you described that kind of old traditional clunky system, my stress level probably went up a few levels.
Yeah.
Um, but I'm glad that you're building something to help with that process. Now, from a benefit standpoint,
Yep.
meaning benefit to the employer, would you say from at least maybe from what you've seen or from what you anticipate, does saving, let's say, 20% on all of those admin costs,
Mhm.
including time spent,
Mhm.
does that mean that businesses can reinvest in better culture or better salaries? Have you seen that?
Yes. Yes, absolutely. And or afford not to do layoffs. Like, I hate to be like grim that way, but if the average renewal is, let's say you're trying to do this on the open market and your average renewal is 15%, and I know some folks who would have like loved that. And you go to a PEO and your average renewal is 6% or 7%, and you compound that, think about like how long that has been compounded negatively for you.
Mm,
So yes, it might be raises, but it also just might be that they can keep the lights on, or that your um 3,000 PPO doesn't become a $6,000 high deductible plan. You know what I mean?
mm,
Like, that's kind of how this is going. So I have seen it where, yes, it becomes like, hey, we're actually going to contribute more to benefits, or we're going to offer a 401k for the first time, or whatever. But I've also seen this be the thing that actually allows folks to hire at all, or
mm,
folks to be able to offer remote work because they now have the infrastructure to figure out California versus Nevada versus New York, without having to be labor law experts. I've seen this where it legitimately does keep the lights on. Um, and so I think that's like why it really is helpful to understand the infrastructural layer, because that's stuff, especially for the employees, that you don't see, and you really shouldn't. But at the same time, if you don't know that it's happening, it's really hard to have understanding, empathy, and also to see how you map into that.
right. And I think at the very least, by having some awareness around this part of the whole thing, it it gives you an opportunity to ask questions. And
Yeah.
sometimes the questions that you ask your supervisor, your employer can catalyze some type of change, some type of at least course of action. And I think there's so much power behind that, which is why I think this conversation is important. Even though it sounds at surface level, maybe something you don't want to put time into learning about, it's so critical because
Yeah.
it is the starting point for much of what you're experiencing as an employee. You know, Casey, as you're talking about fixing the employer system,
Mhm.
I see so much of a massive parallel to my own new venture that I just launched called Empowered. And I'd be remiss if I didn't, point out the connection between the two because I think it's important. In the same way that you saw a broken system in PEO shopping, I saw a broken system in the job market. The power dynamic is absolutely off. Recruitment, as you said about the buying process, is opaque. Candidates are treated like data points. And with Empowered, we're designing a new system to balance that power dynamic. It's about empowering both employees and employers to find sustainable matches based on alignment first. You're fixing the operating system within Travia, and my partner and I are trying to fix the access system through Empowered.
Love it.
My question to you is, do you see this as the future of work? Are we moving toward an era where we are no longer trying to fix the people, but we're starting to fix the systems that people are operating in?
I think so, because the data proves it. I mean, um, uh, just do a Google search of the percentage, whenever you listen to this, the percentage of Americans who think they'll retire or are financially ready to retire, or the percentage of Americans who live paycheck to paycheck. Like, if you don't think the infrastructure matters, like, For you as a person, as an individual, like if you struggled with any of that ever, it matters. Like, and
Mm,
part of it, how you're going to eat an elephant is one bite at a time.
mm,
And then to start getting into where you're going with this, which I think is amazing, it has to is my answer. It
mm.
has to, and it makes logical sense. Like I don't think I'm being a thought leader by
Should.
saying this. Well, because like it wasn't even really all that long ago that employment was pretty local. Like maybe you worked with a larger corporation, but even then, a lot of them, the day to day operations still happened locally, and you
Right.
knew who was in charge of that P&L. And you really don't have to look even that much farther back before you see that like most employment was local. Like
Right.
it was small businesses and that's it. And we lived in more communities where we're not like dealing with faceless people we might not ever meet. And
Mhm.
so because of that, I don't think the concept of community is dead. And I think I hope I'm not too optimistic by saying that. It's just shifted. Um, we frequently don't know our neighbors, but we do know the community of folks that are a lot like us or like how we want to be.
Mm,
And I think the answer is getting into the technology, that it is the infrastructure, because we are still kind of operating on life support from the old assumptions, and the
yes.
systems themselves have to be the thing. I can't just walk into the employer with a resume and apply for a job, and if we sat down and knew each other or talked enough, we'd find out that we knew each other's cousins, and like that was enough. We call a reference and we move forward knowing like, hey, employer and employee, we can like trust each other. That's not possible anymore. And so we do need to reimagine this for the new reality of a dispersed community, a dispersed workforce. That's why I do think it is fixable, and that the answer is infrastructurally technology.
Yeah. No, I mean, I agree with you completely in terms of community isn't necessarily dead. It has absolutely changed. But I think the infrastructure and the systems in place for us to continue to build those communities just change, and we have to change along with it. And in fact, people are craving community today more than ever. Like the need is much more than it was previously. It's just how we go about it has changed. And I think people are still catching up and trying to figure out how to get there. But I do want to drill down on a very specific pain point that I think both of our companies address in the work that we're trying to do, which is time. On your website, you explicitly list, this is how Intravius saves your time. At Empowered, we have the same obsession. We're building systems to drastically reduce the hundreds of hours that candidates are spending doom scrolling job boards and employers spending sifting through resumes. In both our industries, the time tax is incredibly high. Why have these industries, whether it's HR and recruiting or PO buying, allow the process to become so bloated? And when you give a founder back 20 hours of admin time, for example, or if I give a candidate back 50 hours of search time, is that speed actually a form of empathy in today's world?
Yes, it is. Time's the one thing you can't get more of. I think technology, when used best, should be used to raise the quality of life, or it shouldn't be used. Like
Mm,
kind of going back to like the you wouldn't necessarily commit to an organization that just like killed puppies. Like so automation or technology, really all it is making stuff go easier or faster. So I don't think it's worth doing at a human level, or it's at least not sustainable if it isn't making something go faster or better in the name of improving somebody's quality of life, and time can be part of that. Expertise can be part of that. Um, I think it is empathy. Just I want to hit right there. It absolutely is. It's showing dignity. Um, and I think that dignified employment um, is still possible, and we don't have to um, necessarily be so doom and gloom. When you look at Gen Z, especially more like Gen Alpha, I think is what's coming. Their job prospects aren't phenomenal because of how disruptive this has been. I think that both of these sides of the industry are broken on purpose. Number one, broken. Why is it maybe not broken on purpose, but is broken is because we're dealing with people, and people are inherently really difficult to predict, to control, to any of that. And case in point is why you don't have folks doing more day trading on the stock market to become millionaires, is because it relies on the actions of people, and people aren't
Mhm.
always rational.
Right.
So like that's the point where I'm going to let the industry off the hook a little bit, but why I'm going to keep the industry on the hook is like it hasn't become the priority because it hasn't hit them yet.
Mm.
Like it hasn't been the thing that um, has has kept them from advancing or growing or whatever it is. And I think it's because we've all just kind of thrown our hands up, and it's like, well, hey, the complexity is good for me as an employer because I can kind of be the Wizard of Oz behind the
Right.
curtain and to a certain extent. And it's like, even if I really think I should fix it, if nobody else is in mass raising their hands to fix it, then I'm just like the one that's pushing the boulder up the hill.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, if we're talking about benefits, whether it's benefits to the employer or benefits to the employee, getting back time, if you ask me, is the ultimate benefit that I can provide, right? Because all the problems that we talk about in the world of work, whether it's as a business, like all the administrative burden that exists, all the things that you have to do now, or if I'm an employee and we talk about, all the things wrong in the way that we experience work, it all comes down to the time that we're putting in, right? When we talk about work life balance, that comes back to time. When we talk about burnout, it comes back to time. So being able to give that back to somebody by fixing the systems in which they're playing the game, I think is the the biggest thing to happen since, I don't know, wheels.
Yeah,
Uh,
I agree.
so I want to ask you, because when I said time, you got excited.
Um, like you said, we've promised a lot, and why I get excited is because like it is disruptive. You know what I mean? Like uh, AI isn't like coming; it's here, and there are industries who have really dove into that and have done some really crazy stuff and some really good stuff. And I think like what we're going to see this year and in like the near future is the downstream implications of throwing the boulder into the water, and the boulder
Mm,
being AI, the water being current state. Um, is not going to hit every industry the same at the same length, but if something is automatable, it will be automated because folks um, value time so much,
yeah.
and predictability. We all inherently like more predictability and more time back in our days. So that's why I kind of went like this, and evil Mr. Burns laugh from The Simpsons, because like there unfortunately are a layer of infrastructure that exists in my industry and in several that are kind of propped up because of the legacy systems and are profiting off of it. And that's been okay because up to this point, because without them none of the other positive things in the industry happen. And so they've been a necessary part of that. They've been a feature, not a defect. But as soon as we've unlocked this new level of technology societally, it becomes irresponsible, because like if you are aware that you can be more efficient and you're not, and we are not a perfect capitalistic society, but it's definitely in our ethos still, then it's like, all right, well, if you can do something better or cheaper, then you should. Uh, and that's kind of what we're up to. Hey, we found like we don't have to necessarily scale this as a professional services firm. We can scale this on technology, and we believe that we should, because who benefits from it? The folks at the end of the value stream. It's the small business owner and their employees, which the majority of employees in the United States, I think we failed to remember, are low to middle income Americans.
Right.
And these slight tweaks that we say, oh, it doesn't matter, this changed a percent or two, don't matter to the people who are having the conversations. They matter to the people they impact. And that's where I'm
Right.
kind of like, well, if you pull the thread, if we made this easier to implement and to find, and then you can continue seeing that ripple effect where it actually might get to, hopefully, a little bit of more dignified employment, especially in
Yeah.
some of the farther reaches where you wouldn't have necessarily seen it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, you've talked about technology quite a few times now, and you said we shouldn't use technology if it doesn't
Mhm.
improve our lives. Both of our platforms rely on technology. Your
Mhm.
Intravia relies heavily on AI automation. Empowered leverages AI, but we're not inherently an AI based platform. Regardless of the stack, there's fear that tech removes the human.
Yes.
But that by automating the admin chaos, excuse me, you free up humans to do human work. How do you balance high tech infrastructure with high touch human service? Does AI actually make HR more human, or is there risk that the AI will make it less human?
There's risk, but I don't think that it's because of AI. Uh, I- we need to stop, like, we need to not underestimate AI because, like, we've seen 1984, The Terminator, like all of these different, uh,
Great movies.
yeah, great movies, but also like warnings. You
Right.
know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, there's that, but like AI is technology, so is automation, right? And technology also is a brick, it's a wheel, it's a hammer, it's, you know what I mean?
Mm,
So I don't think technology inherently does that. I think we do.
mm,
And that's why I kind of wanted to separate that out. Like, I don't think the answer directly, I don't think that AI or technology is going to make us any less human. I think it can enable humanity. The same way that power tools enabled us to build houses faster, which raised our dignity and raised our quality of life and affordability of like good housing. And I think that this has the possibility of doing the same thing, but not to pontificate, but like it's really up to us on how we're going to do that though. Case in point of like the about 100 years ago, the transition away from horses to automobiles. And, when you started seeing this transition, the automobiles looked a lot like horse carriages with a motor on it. You know what I mean? Until they
mm,
became cars
right.
and it was integrated into the thing and became a new thing. We're kind of at the carriage with a like a motor on it stage right now with
Mm,
AI. And where I'm interested in seeing and I think we will win out even if it comes out with bruises because we have always right sized into making sure that we go back to human again. And once we figure out what this is, like that maybe we are still dealing with the downstream impact of that technological revolution, but um, at first, I don't think it was a really good thing. It was really disruptive because I live in Minneapolis, Minnesota, for example. Any city, you saw these like little neighborhoods that had like the main street square kind of thing, and they had the
mhm,
grocery store and a restaurant because you could really go as far as you could walk, ride a bike, or if you had a horse, ride there. And so it was much more communal. And the initial intent behind the automobile was to get from point A to point B faster so that you could spend time with people more. And what we did in response was move further away. So then it didn't actually make anything go faster. It drove us apart. And then the infrastructure though caught up, right? If now you have suburbs that aren't just like bland strip malls that are starting to thrive and have communities and that kind of thing again. And a lot of other things have caught up. But I think the initial wave of that technology was a net negative. And I think that's where we're seeing is like we're the first thing is going to be disruptive and it's going to be hyper Machiavellian until it isn't because at some point you're not going to slap yourself anymore. Like we're not going to continue to do things that are obviously harmful at scale
mm,
because at a certain point you can have the tool, but like if everyone decided to just stop driving tomorrow, the automobile industry by definition stops. So,
right.
you know what I mean? It like the power is in the consumer's hand always at some point, even if in a centralized economy. If you stop using AI, AI goes away. Like
Right.
if we all did that. So at a certain point, we are the ones who decide of how we're going to engage with the technology, which is why I think we're not going to at scale miss out on our humanity. We're going to
Mm.
bolster it.
I appreciate that. You have such enlightened perspectives that I really appreciate. So thank
Thank you.
you for not just giving me short answers that are like the easy way out. But you
The
talked
next
a
one
little
are
bit.
going to be real lazy, man.
You talked a little bit about growing up in Minnesota. So I want to pivot a little bit. Minnesota, right? I got that right.
I live in
Uh,
Minnesota now, from Missouri, which is just the
from
same thing
Missouri.
but warmer.
In the Midwest.
Yeah,
And I wanna pivot a little bit to that journey, because
yeah.
you're not building in Travia in Silicon Valley. You're
I'm
building it
not.
in the Midwest, and you've
Heck
mentioned that
yes.
your work is grounded in faith and family. In
Yes.
the tech world, though, growth at all costs is usually the religion, but you talk about purpose driving profit, which is similar to what I say,
Mhm.
purpose should drive profits, not the other way around. How does building in the Midwest with those grounded values change the way that you're building your product? Does it force you to be more pragmatic and less hype?
Yeah, it does. I do want to point out that uh, Silicon Valley has way more crazy unicorn exit stories. They also have way more failures than
Mm,
anywhere
mhm.
else. Like
Yep.
we don't
We don't
hit on
romanticize
both
that part,
sides of
though. Yeah.
yeah, like the boring markets, quote unquote, might not have as many home runs, but we definitely have more doubles up the middle.
Mm, mm,
In my opinion. Um, I think that it forces pragmatism, and part of that's like an access thing. Being a founder based in the Midwest, like we don't have access to the kinds of voices that are saying go raise $10 million on pre-product, let alone folks who would do that, unless it really was just a savant thing, in which case you're going to end up in those rooms anyway. Um, but I don't think most technological innovations are like that groundbreaking. It like usually it's just like the ripple effects, and Intravia is. I mean, it's a really big thing to me in this space, but it's not. Again, you're probably not going to know it exists unless
mhm.
you're in this space.
Right.
So I think it does force pragmatism, um, and it does at least force you to not stay in a bubble. Like we're
Mm,
not. There isn't enough of a gravitational force to the Midwest to force you to stay in the Midwest. And though, when the Midwest, for example, bands together, we have a pretty good but dispersed network and capital that can rival any of the other markets. So when things do catch on, I think that's where you start seeing it come out. I'm really excited to not be building on the coast personally.
well, I wish I could say the same. I'm in San Diego. I'm not in Silicon Valley, but, I'm on the coast, so there's definitely a little bit of a trickle down there. So we're getting to the end of the episode here, but you talk about, in your work, you talk about renewal shock. The moment when
Mhm.
a founder gets their insurance renewal, costs go up 20% and then they're panicking. And then that anxiety, as you mentioned earlier, trickles down to the team. Talk to the founder listening right now who feels trapped by their infrastructure. What's the psychological shift that they need to make to stop being a victim of their vendors and start taking control?
I think it's just that. Like, don't be afraid to ask questions. The same way, if you have a financial advisor and you don't understand everything they're saying, you can read a book. You can ask ChatGPT these days enough questions until you start understanding what it is they're talking about. You can advocate for yourself, and so that would be the answer, is like to start doing something to understand it a little bit more than you did yesterday, and to start going and informed. And even if the answer is yes, I'm not trying to say like everybody's out to screw you, because they're not. Make sure you really understand why something's being recommended or why you're going to do it, and start really asking people to validate that, even in
Yeah.
good faith. A lot sometimes stuff gets kind of on set it and forget it, and um, just make this year the year that you make sure to be reconvinced that you're doing the right thing, if anything.
Mm.
Um, and then curiosity will take you into positive places from there, right?
Yeah, love that. Now we've talked in previous episodes about the gig economy, and traditional PEOs were built for the 9 to 5 W-2
Mhm.
employee. Is the current HR infrastructure ready for the future of work, or do we have to rebuild or do a total rebuild to handle a workforce that is a lot more fluid, more remote, and even fractional?
So there are some vendors, I don't want to speak for them, so I'm not going to shout them out, but there are some vendors in the HR tech and PEO space that are trying to solve that. Um, and I think they're doing some good work. I think why it hasn't been 100% solved is we're not really stable on where that's going to land yet. Um, and there has to be a balance. This isn't an opinion. I just think it's a fact of like you're gonna have more folks that are freelancing, whether that's full time or outside of the 9 to 5, and that might be driving for Uber or Instacart or whatever, and it also might be fractional work. But that also we're not going to have several billion businesses, where everyone's their own business per se. Like there is
Uh,
going to be some sort of grouping, and I
yeah,
think we need to figure out like where that balance is before it can be 100% solved.
yeah,
There's a good enough solve out there in the market, or they're good enough solve for where we are at right now. I think it'd be irresponsible to continue to like push forward because we don't really know if that's a trend that's going to continue or not. It seems
right,
like it's going to always be there in some context,
sure.
but is this hype or is this like the new normal? And
Um,
I don't know that we could say either one yet.
I agree. Well said. All right, Casey, before I get to the final question, I did want to ask you because when you originally, expressed interest in the show, you said the the bold fix for broken HR. So if
Mhm.
you were going to summarize our conversation today, what is that bold fix for broken HR?
Use technology to your own dang advantage to be able to make your employment experience more human.
Mm, well said. All right, Casey, last thing. If a leader could fix one piece of their backend infrastructure tomorrow to create the most peace of mind for their employees, what should it be?
I'm going to say something that has nothing to do with what I do.
I love it.
Calendar management so you can have better focus time as a leader and more regular and intentional one-on-ones.
Mm,
We are If you're going to start with anything, make sure that you start with building the infrastructure, and it could literally be a calendar, you know what I mean, whatever, to make sure that you're understood as a leader and that your employees are understood as your employees and that you have great and consistent communication.
mm,
Anything else doesn't matter. Like we said, the tree falling in the forest. Make
yeah.
sure you're communicating, don't assume it.
Sweet. I love that. And like I said, everything comes back to time. And I
Sure
would
does.
argue that it does have everything to do with what you're doing because your mission is to really give people time back, and
Mm.
Intravia is the how of how you do that. But the time is there. The time factor is there. So Casey, I want to say thank you for showing us the plumbing in all of this. I know it's not sexy, but it is absolutely essential. And to those of you listening, we've now seen the vision from John Vermica. We've talked about the architecture with Natalie Jackson. And today we really dove into the infrastructure with Kasey Devine. Now we have the complete picture of the employee. Well, I wouldn't say complete. We have a lot more of the picture when it comes to the employee experience and how it relates to engagement. And so I hope that you stick with us for the rest of the season because we're going to continue to explore this theme and help you to understand all these factors that are in play that contribute to the way that you experience work and how you contribute to whatever it is that you feel aligned with. If you haven't already, make sure you follow, subscribe, like, and share the podcast so we can continue to grow and spread the message and build this future of work that both Kasey and I see. I'm Clarence, and I'm your host, and this is Aligned Engaged Fulfilled. Thank you so much for joining us.